Hey there everybody, it's Mark Crowley. I'm back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about 10 more artistic myths, or myths about artists and the creative life. We're going to be evaluating, seeing if there's any truth to them. Before I get into that though, I want to quickly tell you what's going on with my Patreon. I've created this map that I've made available to everyone who joined at what I call the Fellowship of the Beloved Gouache level, and I'm going to just splice in a little graphic of this map so you can see what it looks like right here. Alright, so the first thing you probably notice is that it looks like a sort of island nation in the shape of a corgi. But the fun thing about it is that every single one of the town names, the rivers, the mountains, they are all named after people who joined at that level. This is my way of shouting out people who decided to support me on my Patreon. I thought I would mention it up top in case there's anyone that was sort of on the fence and you were thinking about joining. Now is a great time to join, because what I'm going to do is go ahead and add your name to that map and make it available to you, that you can print it out and become sort of a part of things over there. So anyway, there's a link in the description of this video if you want to go ahead and take the plunge and join me there. And many thanks in advance if you choose to do so. But let's go ahead and get into myth number 11. I'm just starting with the number 11 because I already did this video a couple of months back where I went through 1 through 10 of these myths. So here we go. This one suggested by Javier Justicia, I hope I'm saying that right, and it is this: you must have a degree, college or art/trade school, to be a professional artist. This is a great one, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I didn't think of that in the original video. And I do think that is a myth, very decisively. This idea that you have to go to school, specifically art school, in order to do something artistic for a living. That is certainly not the case. I'm not saying that art school is bad or anything, but don't think that it is necessary. I didn't go to a specific art school. I went to a liberal arts college that had a decent art program, but by no means a famous one. I got a well-rounded education that was not, only about learning artistic techniques. But the truth is, when it comes to getting a job in a creative field, they are not asking you to show a diploma. In most cases, they just want to see what you're capable of. And it is theoretically possible for someone to be successful as an artist without having even finished college, or indeed high school. Again, hypothetically. Now, I want to caution you that I think it's risky, of course, to go into life without the highest level of education you can get. But this idea that you need to blow tens of thousands of dollars on art school, that is certainly not the case. So anyway, thanks to Javier for suggesting that one. I think that is a great one to bear in mind. Let's move on to myth number 2. Artists are shy or introverted. This from 123 Rock Fan. Yeah, this is an interesting one. This idea that artists are introverted. They are sometimes, I think, there's this idea that they don't communicate well. They can only communicate through their art. That they are somehow separated from society socially, mysterious, that kind of thing. And of course, that is totally a myth. A lot of people who are in the artistic field are, as you might expect, actually very good at communicating. That some are indeed almost obsessed with communicating. I think I probably fall into that category a little bit. And that, I'm not super extroverted either. I'm probably somewhere between those two extremes. But yeah, I thought that was worth mentioning, that idea of the shyness of the artist, or the artist that somehow is socially awkward or unable to connect with the rest of society. I do think that is certainly a generalization that doesn't hold true for all artists. This one from L. Baston, I hope I'm saying her last name right. The substance abusing artist stereotype. Yes, this is an interesting one, and there is unfortunately, this idea of the like the writer who drinks, or the people who fall into a sort of a druggy existence or that kind of thing. That's a dangerous stereotype, especially if people see it as encouraging, sort of like, wow, well, if I want to be an artist and I just abuse these substances, it's going to be inspirational for me or whatever. So that's certainly, that one has an added level of danger to it, the degree to which anyone believes that is true. And of course, drugs can be incredibly dangerous and ruin people's lives, and so we certainly don't want to create any image of the alluring, drug-using artist or anything like that. So I wanted to make sure we got that in there as sort of like, something that is not only not true, but potentially dangerous for people who fall for that myth, So let's move on now to myth number 14 from Emily Iris Paxman. Great artists start young, born with a paintbrush in their hands. Yes, there certainly is this idea of someone born with incredible talent, like a prodigy or something like that, and that I think will lead to this myth, although Emily didn't say it explicitly, but it could lead to this idea that you need to have started young. If you didn't start young, it's too late, which I think is really kind of a tragic myth if anyone believes that, because that is certainly not the case. People famously talk about Vincent van Gogh, or Van Gogh, if that's the right way to say it, who started relatively late in life and, of course, became one of the greatest painters of all time, and moved oil painting forward in a way that plenty of people who had started much younger than him did not. So that's a good one. Let's blow that myth up right now. This idea that you got to start young. It certainly helps, as with anything, to start young, and I think with a lot of sports and physical activities like that, it probably is true that, like, if you want to do gymnastics or something, if you didn't start by a certain age, I don't know what I'm talking about when I say this, but it seems to me that if you try to start doing gymnastics at the age of 18 or 20 or something, that it probably is a little late for you to become one of the great ones. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that. Maybe I'm spreading new myths about gymnastics. What do you think of that with my video? Anyway, let's keep moving and go on to myth number 15. Art is always created by an individual working alone. Now, I should say at this point we're moving into myths that I just came up with on my own. The first four that we looked at were, of course, suggested by my YouTube viewers, people who follow me on Twitter and so forth. This one I just came up on my own. The art is always created by an individual working alone. I think that is a popular myth, and just, even giving that casual thought, you're going to see, no, that's not true. There's a lot of art is created by people joining forces and working together, to me that sounds like fun, really, the collaborative art form. When I was in college, there was this giant stained glass window project that was being made by someone that they brought in from off campus. And the guy couldn't do it on his own, and he had to sort of enlist the help of all these people. It became this great sort of communal art process, that it was not a solo person working. And indeed, I remember, it always stuck with me, that this one woman who was almost like one of the cleaning people or something, she did not come from this highfalutin artistic background, but she got involved with the cutting of the individual pieces of glass and so forth, and ended up making a hugely important contribution to that stained glass window. So yeah, this idea that art, it's all about this solo individual, and that sort of ties into this glorified maverick genius kind of thing, that it's all about this one heroic artist working in isolation and nobody gets it except them. That kind of thing, I think, is an unfortunate stereotype, and Though I have to admit that I myself have worked largely just on my own. It's fairly, but even when I work on a book, I'm working with an editor, and so that becomes collaborative. And just the other day, I was working on a new book. The designer came up with this great idea for the sort of chapter heading pages that I would never have come up with on my own. And so that certainly was an example of a collaborative thing going on in one of my own jobs. But, certainly there's plenty of examples of comics that are created by one person writing, the other person drawing, or indeed in the old days, whole teams of people working together. So this idea of the solo artist, that is certainly, common but not required, let's say, when it comes to the artistic life. Let's move on now to myth number 16, another one that I just cooked up on my own. Art isn't worthy of attention unless it's breaking new ground. Now, this one is sort of interesting because I think there may be some people who do agree with this. I think critics, art critics, music critics, tend to believe this, that if you're not breaking new ground, that doesn't count as great art or art that's worthy of attention. And I thought I'd throw this in almost as, like a topic of discussion. Does art have to break new ground to be great art? Certainly a lot of great art does break new ground. But I'm the sort of person sometimes that if I had the choice between something that's swinging for the fences and trying to do something boldly new but completely fails on every level versus the thing that is not trying to do something new but is absolute perfection and they nail it and it is such a pleasure, I think I'm going to and go for that other one, the second one, just in terms of, as a consumer of artistic creations. I'd rather enjoy the thing that was done very, very well, even if it's not especially innovative, even if it isn't breaking new ground. It's food for thought, something to think about. This idea of, does art have to be innovative and break new ground in order for it to be great art or worthy of attention? I'll be curious in the comments section if people have thoughts on that one. Give me a moment, because I'm going to grab some pastels and I'm going to try to get some other art materials in here to add a little more to this illustration I'm working on. All right, got some pastels here, and actually I have neglected to explain what this is that I'm working on. This is a panel from my next book that's coming out this coming summer, The Comic Book Lesson. It's a sequel of sorts to my book called The Drawing Lesson that came out a number of years back, this time with new characters but using the same format. I am attempting to teach people how to make comics by way of a comic book story. So this is one of the panels, and it shows two of the characters that you will meet in that story. I'll talk more about it as we get closer to publication. But let's go ahead and move on now to myth number 17. A true artist is concerned exclusively with self-expression, not with earning a living. This is an important one, and I think a fairly dangerous one in terms of people feeling like, you've got to only think about your art and pay no attention whatsoever, especially if you're trying to do it. If you're not trying to earn a living from it, then fine, just focus completely on the art itself. But certainly, you could go all the way back to the days of Michelangelo and Da Vinci and read their journals or letters or whatever and find that they were certainly focused on earning a living. A lot of this stuff, a lot of these decisions that were being made were related to who the patron was and that kind of thing. And, sort of interestingly, I began this video with a reference to my Patreon, which is, of course, concerned with, earning a living. So it's that kind of thing. There's nothing to be ashamed of, really. And I think there is this weird thing with musicians and artistic people that they're being held to some sort of standard of purity. Don't be a sellout, man. It's not about the money. It's, And if you're thinking about the money, then you're not a real artist, or you're caving into capitalism or whatever it is. To be sure, if someone is concerned exclusively with money and you can see that it's damaging the quality of their art, that's something maybe to be concerned about. But as with any job, you do have to think about how it's going to put bread on the table, whether it's an artistic job or any kind of a job. So yeah, that's, I thought, a slightly dangerous myth, this idea of, real artists don't think about the money, man. You just got to think about the art. So let's move on. We're getting closer to the end of it. I'll do one more and then maybe take a break to add more detail to this illustration. Myth number 18. Most of the stuff you see in the modern art section of the museum is a scam committed by people with no actual artistic talent. It's no better than something scribbled by a child. Now this one I think is going to be interesting to see what the response is, because I bet you there's a lot of people watching this video right now who share that opinion, who, if they are in the modern art section of a museum and they see one of these things that's just like splattered paint, or some minimalist thing where it's a big white canvas with just one dot somewhere, that they get infuriated by that and feel like that's not art, it's a scam. It's like, this is ridiculous that people are spending. How can they spend $10,000 on this thing? There's no talent in that. I'll be interested to see how people react to this, because I think in a lot of ways that is the way most people feel about modern art. And we're almost at the stage of where you have to say a word in defense of modern art, that it may not be immediately comprehensible, or the so-called level of talent needed to create this may not be obvious. But when I go into the modern art section of an art museum, I'm not looking at it through those kind of goggles. To me, it's more about the fun of seeing these, wild things that people are doing. And to me, the modern art section is one of the most delightful parts of the museum. You kind of have to unplug that rational part of your mind sometimes and just enjoy the madness, I suppose, of some of these works of art. And the whole point is maybe to get you to feel a little knocked off balance, and to force the viewer to question, what is this thing I'm looking at, Anyway, I thought I would throw that in there, and some of you might say, hey, that's not a myth, that's reality, it is a scam. And I suppose it's possible that some modern art is done by people with no principles. It's, as with all things, there are unscrupulous people who are abusing the system, but I bet you that is not the case for the lion's share of what you see in the modern art museum. It was undertaken in good faith by someone who really is trying to create something unique. And that there is a philosophy behind it. It's not just a big scam created by someone who has no actual talent. Anyway, let's kick it into time-lapse just for 20 seconds or so as I add some more refinement to this illustration, and then we'll be back with those last two myths before we wind down the video. Okay, well, we're a little closer to being done with this illustration, and that means I can go ahead and jump into these final two myths. Myth number 19. Artists are so devoted to their art that they neglect their family and friends. Okay, now this is an interesting one, because I have to sort of look at my own life and see, am I guilty of that? I don't think that I am, and I'm pretty sure that this is, again, one of these things that is not unique to art by any means. I think you find plenty of businessmen and so forth that are obsessed with their work, and they neglect their families more than any artist would, to be honest. So that kind of thing, I think, is really not unique to artists by any stretch. I do think that there, I can admit that there are times when I was so eager to complete a project that I did sort of have that attitude of like, man, if only I didn't have to deal with the family right now, I would, I'd be done with this by now, that sort of thing. And the truth is that is not a good attitude to have, as once you've started a family, or indeed just in terms of friendships. I personally don't think that there's any, justification in sacrificing those friendships just so that you can say, oh, I created this, great work of art or whatever. I feel like it's more important to be a good person than to cause, suffering to your family members or neglect them just so that you can, have the glories of creating this thing. I think that sort of idea of like, oh, I sacrificed so much and I caused so much pain to other people, but it was worth it in the end because look at this amazing thing I created. I think that's a dangerous sort of mindset to fall into. But there's going to be a variety of opinions, a range of opinions on that one, I'm pretty sure. And now we come to the last one, and this is sort of inspired by a comment that I got on Twitter from one of my friends over there by the name of Sharni Hawk, I hope is the right way to pronounce her name. And I sort of adapted it into myth number 20 here. Real art is stuff like oil paintings and sculptures. Crafting, illustration, or cartooning may be fun or cute, but it's not real art. I think this sort of is a pervasive myth that has been around for a long time, and I certainly think that people who are like craftspeople in particular, it probably riles them to think that their work is thought of as sort of somehow second-class art. Like if you're a carpenter and you've made this really beautiful chair, it's like, oh well, that's just a chair. That's not real art. You know what I mean? That kind of attitude is, of course, very damaging or angering to people who do that as their chosen form of art. And then, the whole idea of illustration and cartooning being looked down on, that's certainly something that cartoonists have always had to deal with, this idea of like, oh, that's kids stuff or whatever, or that's really cute, but when are you going to make a real oil painting and be a real artist, that kind of thing. I think that I certainly don't agree with that, and I do think over time that we have entered a world where illustration, comics and stuff is getting more respect in that regard, and maybe it's even flipped around, and comics and cartoonists get more attention than modern artists these days. But in any case, that is a myth that is still out there, and I thought it was worth mentioning. I think that kind of brings us to the end of my video, but hang on, I'm going to go ahead and grab my books so that I can say thank you to anyone who has supported me by getting them, like My Last Summer with Cass, my newest graphic novel. The Drawing Lesson, which is, of course, you saw me working on art from the sequel, which will be called The Comic Book Lesson. And, of course, Mastering Manga 1, 2, and 3. Really cannot say thank you often enough to those of you who support me by getting any of those books. But let's go ahead and lay down this pencil. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back with another one real soon.